Thank you very much. Okay, so what I'm going to do is give you a bit of an insight into some of the things that I did inside government. And I produced a number of documents through my time in government which were intended to provoke and intended to try and stimulate out-of-the-box thinking within the policy environment. And that was for middle-ranking and senior policymakers as well as ministers, and in particular, the Secretary of State. And one of the products I produced was something that I called Securing the Food of the Future. Its function was really to ask the question, what should the policy of a country like the UK be towards food, looking towards mid-century? And in order to do that, what I did in this particular case was to do what I call a mini foresight analysis, which is fundamentally taking a bunch of trends, doing a set of trend analyses, and then based on that, to try to understand what the transformational objectives should be, and then how to position the UK in relation to those trends and those transformational objectives, and then to come up with policy solutions. Now, those policy solutions are not worked through. They are simply there to provoke thinking and thinking out of the box. So what I want to do is go through the trends that I came up with, and there are 10 trends. You've got to keep, I mean, there could be a lot more than that. I think you could think of many more. And you've got to keep them pretty high level, and this is a strategic analysis as well. So I'm going to go through the trends, the transformation objectives, and then the positioning of the UK and the solutions. So some of these trends you've already heard of, and David Tillman yesterday gave us a very good view of some of the challenges that exist around global population growth, around climate change, and I'm not going to spend any time describing these because they've been dealt with very significantly and very sufficiently over the time that we've been here. But there are one or two trends here that we haven't really talked about. For a start, it was mentioned yesterday, agriculture is becoming an increasingly large proportion of greenhouse gas emissions, and that's not because greenhouse gas emissions are necessarily going up per unit of agriculture. It's because we are not modifying agriculture as fast as we are modifying other parts of the economy. And I say that having sat in meetings in the UK government where representatives from the agricultural side have basically sat and said nothing with respect to how much agriculture can contribute to the UK's global greenhouse gas production targets, when other sectors of the economy have been able to make quite significant contributions. The fourth trend, however, which is really the one I want to zero in on, is that current food production has low resource efficiency. The diagram here on your left is actually a global representation of resource consumption. It keeps going up, it's exponential, and it's actually rising. Since 2000, it's actually gone up faster than it did before. The UK perspective on that is the diagram on the right, which shows each of our major sectors of the economy and the relative resource efficiency of those sectors of the economy. You'll see the top one is agriculture, forestry, and fishing. The UK has a very small fishing industry and a relatively small forestry industry. Our fishing industry is about the size of our lawnmower industry. So most of that is because of agriculture. And it doesn't take a PhD degree to understand that agriculture is actually enormously resource inefficient compared with most other parts of the economy. Even manufacturing is about 3 times more resource efficient than agriculture is. So if we want to get agriculture, and that's a big if, and that's a policy if we want to get agriculture to the same levels of resource efficiency as other sectors of the economy, we have a lot of work to do. By about 2050, we would expect manufacturing to be even more resource efficient, and if agriculture doesn't move, then it has to be between 5 and 10 times more efficient by 2050 than it is now. Now, that's a massive, massive change. The fifth trend is that the global food system has been the main driver of efficiency, certainly over the last 20 years or so. As we know, yields have tended to stagnate. They've gone up a bit, but they've tended to stagnate. And actually, it's about how we trade food around the world, and it's where we grow the food that has changed. So that global food system and the economics underlying it has actually brought in most of the efficiencies. The sixth trend is that there are some potentially disruptive technologies available to us, and they're now beginning to appear, and some of them are beginning to show their worth, although I think a lot of work has still to be done on them. The seventh trend is that there's a high level of adaptation in diets. I think we often think that actually diet doesn't change very much, but actually diet is changing all the time. We're eating more processed food. We know we're eating more meat, for example, even though in some parts of society there's less meat being produced. The eighth trend is land is becoming increasingly scarce, and it's becoming a scarce commodity, and it's a particularly scarce commodity in the UK. Ninth trend is that across the world, there's potential huge instabilities in the global food system, depending on what happens mainly in the global south and depending on what China decides. So for a country like the UK that trades in a lot of its food, that's really, really important. And those stabilities are really not fully understood. The 10th trend is that growth in agricultural production is slowing, and it's slowing even though we're actually spending more overall on research in agriculture. So we're getting less back for the research money we're putting in. So what are the transformational objectives? Well, if we go for BAU, business as usual, we might get technology progress at 2 to 3% per annum if we really put our foot to the floor and double production in about one generation. There'll be no transformation. There's reliance on phosphate, nitrates and pesticides. We're relying on tillage systems, probably high livestock, high reliance on fossil fuels, and at the moment we're spending roughly 10 calories of fossil fuel for about every calorie of protein we produce. I think by 2050 that's not really going to be feasible. And caloric efficiencies of agriculture are extremely low, about 1 to 2 parts in 10,000 or so. And as I said, low resource efficiency. So an opposing scenario is that we move to robotics, process engineering, genetics. We have closed-loop manufacturing systems. We have low energy-dense food production close to consumption, and energy-dense commodities are produced next to energy sources like hydro, geothermal, and solar. And food quality is also engineered in. The position of the UK, actually, I'm not going to spend long on this. We produce roughly 80% of our production by 20% of our farmers on 50% of the land. There's a huge opportunity there for increasing efficiency by shifting, probably over a 10-year period, from a situation where we're freeing up, where we're actually using a lot of marginal land for producing food very efficiently, to a position where we're using land for storing carbon, for biodiversity, and for health, rather than directly for farming. And that would actually probably mean that we have a deficit of about 20% in productivity. And what we need to do is drive up unconventional sources of food production over that time period in order to deliver the amount of food we need without actually having to export our food production. So the solutions, let's go back. Sorry, this isn't working. There it is, that's it. We need to, as I said, use robotics. We need to use process engineering, and we need to use food science and plant genetics. And we need to use them all simultaneously in new food production systems. I've illustrated here, what is called control system farming or vertical farming. That's only one of many different types of systems that are under development. The bottom diagram is actually a supermarket. It's a robotic supermarket in the UK. There are significant engineering companies looking at how to produce food. The inefficiencies in food are noticed, in food production are noticed. Anybody who can produce food at greater efficiency and therefore less cost can make a lot of money at it. So there's quite a lot of potential investment going into this in the relatively near future. So just to summarize, food production is a major source of environmental problems. Transformation of the food system is a high priority, and I mean transformation, and that's not doing business as usual. Technologies are available, but they need to be systematized, and shifting research focus research needs to be focused on integrating new technologies and developing them in that systemized way to produce new production systems. Thank you.